I try lots of stuff, be it watching, reading, or playing, on this never ending journey to find things that bring me joy. But it can sometimes get boring. Times where nothing in my backlog calls me, which I'm pretty sure we've all felt at one point. So occasionally, I like to start something blind, diving into media without a clue of what I'm getting myself into. And I do this a lot in the manga section at Barnes& Noble. Maybe because I'm trying to read more manga, but who knows. Drop some recommends you think are my style below. I just browse the shelves and base purely on the title and, of course, the covers. Whatever catches my eye, I just buy it right there and then. And there are a lot of good ones that still tempt me every time I go, but one day, off the corner of my eye, I notice a single pink and green spine at the bottom of the last shelf. A new book that wasn't there before. Yeah, it's another zombie story, there are tons of those, so why is it almost a year later I'm still thinking about this one? What is it about this zombie apocalypse manga that makes it stand out for me? To figure this out, let's start with the author of Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead, Asuharo, a mangaka who's been putting stuff out since 2005, where he started getting traction with his second series being the charming yet forgotten Hide and Closer, followed by what gave him his big break, Alice in Borderland. Two stories that, while very different, show his versatility as a creator. Hide and Closer having an early 2000s shonen era aesthetic with its angular / blocky designs and larger facial features, with lighthearted writing to match it. Alice in Borderland being the complete opposite, giving it a much uglier and gritty look, grounding it for the mature material. From the two, I very much prefer the former, but you can clearly see his skill in both. One having very expressive character designs, while Alice in Borderland being able to get surreal, beautiful, and even haunting because of the detail. There is another and much more important element to his work, that being his understanding of situations and being able to plunge his characters into danger. There's always an external force that is constantly endangering his protagonist. Hiding Closer, the main goal for the world is to take out the titular duo. Alice in Borderland, having the characters' lives as forfeit was the only way to extend their lives by partaking in death games. One forcing danger onto the characters, while the other forcing the characters into it. Him being able to get the same basic concept and finding a twist to create something unpredictable speaks volumes, especially for his previous manga since it's all about games. It's the main reason why it was so entertaining, and it shows with its popularity. It was this double whammy of art and writing that made his stuff solid, which is why it's sad that with Alice in Borderland ending, he would retire from drawing altogether. He did work on it for 6 years, and if you include Hide and Closer, which wrapped the year prior to this one starting, it might actually be 9 years, so I totally get him just noping out of the idea of doing that again. And it's something you can kind of feel was the beginning of Zom 100. Unlike his previous series where the main characters are young and still finding themselves, here it starts with someone beginning their adult life. Akira being someone who lands his dream job in an industry that he's always been a fan of, only for it to be the opposite of what he expected. It consuming his life, having very little time for anything outside of that. I can't confirm or deny that this is based on his life since he's very private, but I can't help thinking he channeled his feelings of working on Alice in Borderland into Zom 100, which is why it feels so real. Akira getting assimilated into his job, losing himself, becoming a mindless wage slave, and then without knowing it, 3 years pass. Until one day, barely escaping zombies on his way to work. Instead of being shocked or scared, he's overjoyed because he's finally free of his awful job. While this is super exaggerated, it perfectly shows us the hopeful, energetic light of Akira that we're gonna follow in this bleak setting. Someone who already went through a miserable existence that he's unfazed when the world becomes that. If anything, he sees it as a challenge, which is why he's always in such high spirits. Which is where the manga starts to get really fun, cause when I say he takes it as a challenge, you have no idea how much he does. So let's go through some of the first things he does in the zombie apocalypse. After barely escaping a horde, he then proceeds to climb down the building to find his crush in the city to confess to her. The following day, he again climbs down his building, only this time to acquire the important resource of beer. These are for real the first things he does the moment the world goes to crap. It's really funny, but also sets up how unpredictable this manga is going to be. But don't get the wrong idea, while it does come off as just fun in game, it immediately gets across that death is a real thing that can happen at any point. It's in this moment that Akira creates his bucket list, that can range from realistic to impossible sounding, which is why the moment anything becomes even slightly feasible, whatever is the focus gets dropped for that. This is what made Zom 100 really stand out for me. Usually writers are trying to find a new take on the zombies to get a unique story, but Asuhiro instead decided to find a new twist on the survivors. Instead of throwing away parts of who they are, they're instead grasping onto them even more, which informs their wild decision making. The zombies themselves are just plain old zombies to the point that everyone knows what they are since it's not a new concept. It takes place in our world where there's tons of media with the idea, which allows it to circumvent what is usually a slow start and just get to the meat, the characters and the journey. As you can see with Akira in the beginning, there is a lot of both. The bucket list may seem pointless, especially for the amount of danger there is in the world, but whenever something is scratched off, while there is the immediate satisfaction for you and the characters, there is long-term gain, either in the sense of growth or actual resources. For example, the cast I haven't talked about yet were all gained because of different goals on the list. Akira meeting Shizuka during his beer run, who serves as the typical cautious survivor that initially declined joining him because he's too reckless. The second being Kensho, his best friend that goes along with anything thrown his way. Along the journey to scratch something off, we explore who they are, that you fall in love with them since their quirks start to seep through, like you were actually traveling with them. Akira is a massive goofball, but you still see that he wants to reclaim parts of his past, things he threw away when he became an adult. Kensho looking like he had everything going for him when in reality he hated his life and lied to make himself feel better, which is why he wants to become a comedian to make other people laugh. Shizuka having her entire life dictated by someone else with only profit in mind, burying who she really is in the process. It all informs their actions. Akira's decision making, Kensho making himself a joke, and Shizuka's cold and distant exterior. These three together have a great dynamic because Shizuka is the most rational and strategic of them, with the others executing on her ideas, while Akira and Kensho slowly bringing her down to their level, cracking her serious facade as the manga progresses, which never gets old. She ends up being one of my favorite characters because of this, like when she talks about her quote-unquote zombie research or when her logic gets used against her. There's lots of fun to be had with these guys. Haro Aso being able to tie joy and danger together is what also gives the manga its wild tonality. So many chapters can start simple and safe and in a single page turn fall apart where the goal is now to get out of the situation. The reverse is also true, where it just starts pretty bad and a single factor can throw everything to a much lighter mood. There are so many times while I was reading it that he was able to get me to laugh in what was essentially the worst scenario possible because everything is tied back to who they are. This tonality is handled so well because of his last two series where he worked with both individually. But unlike those where it's about forcing external danger, here he went the complete opposite direction, making the characters choose to get into it. Almost all of it is completely avoidable, but you get why they risk it since there's a human element to their desires. He made it that having character is the ultimate danger, that creates this new form of tension I haven't seen before. Survival stories always have a focus on resources, so when a big opportunity appears, the audience gets the stakes of going for it and feels risk. So even if there are some casualties, it might still be worth it. But here, since they voluntarily throw themselves into hazard for nothing, the stress comes from the possibility of one of them dying for something like TV or beer. Zom 100 feels like he got the best elements from both and combined them here, having the fun, silly personalities of Hide and Closer with the danger, tense-filled situations of Alice in Borderland. You're also going to need to match it visually like how he did for both series, but that's easier said than done since they're so different and were exclusive to each other. It's even more difficult since the only guy behind them retired from drawing. He'd need to find an artist that has a handle on this, and he'd find that in the most unexpected place. Hallelujah Overdrive focuses on Kosame Asakura, who, after learning the guitar and making a confession song for his crush, promptly gets rejected. This being his final moment of junior high, spite is what fuels him to get better. So he seeks out the best way to do so, the light music club of his new high school. But to his dismay, learns there isn't one. Right when Utsugi Haru overhears and drags him away to reveal there's secretly another club since they've been banned. When her band plays, Kosame is no longer motivated by spite and falls in love with music, kicking off the story of him finding his sound by forming his own band. And yeah, it's a very youth fantasy kind of story with really juvenile art that works perfectly for it, but seems like a mismatch for something like Zom 100. That is until you learn that Haru's group is a heavy metal band. The mangaka being able to portray the intensity, roughness, and grit that even though you can't hear them playing, you can definitely feel it. All of a sudden making Kotaro Takada the perfect guy to visualize Aso's story. And not only due to this, but mainly because he knows how to envision a feeling. When Kosame plays, he gets across that it's harmonious and beautiful, that it holds you in the moment. Two very different tones, but the passion is still conveyed so easily. For his first manga, he nailed the characters having fun and why they seek out more of it. Everything presents the joy of being alive, and you can see all of this in Zom 100 down to the covers. His stuff is just so pleasing to look at because of how vibrant and energetic they are that you'd think he might struggle with the horror elements, but he completely nails them, being an evolution of what he did in Hallelujah Overdrive. Which I want to add stopped being translated 5 years ago, so yes, I am in a lot of pain right now. I know this segment's been going on for a little too long, but I just gotta say that I started reading it for this video, and I got really into it, so can someone please translate the rest of it? Because it gets so interesting at the end. An antagonist is introduced, someone unexpected joins, friction in the band, all of this happens right when it cuts off. I don't even know who half of these characters are on the cover, but they look amazing. Now I think it's time to get back to Zom 100. If you've made it this far, you're most likely interested in reading it, which means I gotta talk about my issues with it. Haru Aso has always struggled with making interesting antagonists, and that doesn't stop here. One of the early arcs drags because of this, being very predictable in its outcome. The main purpose is to flesh out Shizuka, which I think it did a great job in, but everything else I always want to skip. A much later arc has a similar issue, but the setup for it has so much on the line that it's still super interesting. At one point, a guy gets let off too easily for some of the stuff he did, and it still really bothers me. Bear with me on this next one, it's a pretty short manga, with each volume being comprised of 4 chapters, so you're gonna get through it really quickly, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you find out that it stopped being translated. Kotaro Takada can't catch a break, god damn it! The manga is still going on in Japan and currently at volume 9, but where the translation cuts off works as a pretty good ending. Even though based on the covers of the next 3 books, it looks like it's gonna get even more wild, having robots, dinosaurs, and money. Like you, I also want to see what all of this means, and luckily the series has been licensed by Viz Media with volume 5 right around the corner. So we'll soon be able to continue the story, but only by tankobon. While it's not ideal, I totally get it. The reason why translation stopped being that the people doing so lost interest because they thought the story was too basic. And I agree. Zom 100 is far from a perfect manga. Yeah, you're just watching a group of friends be idiots, but that's why I like it. When anybody achieves their goal, no matter how small or silly, despite the impossible odds, I can't help but smile because it's so pure and human. There's something about seeing people not give up what they love when there's seemingly no time left in the world that brings you a different type of joy. And with last year, I kinda needed that. And maybe someone else needs that too. If you guys hit the end of the video, I always appreciate that, especially for this one because it was a biggie, it took a lot of time, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. And if you guys want more, you may want to stay on the channel because I make videos like these all the time, like these last two. But as always, bye guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.